Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the IOI workshop / Q&A. So the general structure of this is welcome our three guests, and then we're going to watch the IOI Team's members live solve a LeetCode contest, and then we'll go into some FAQ and they'll all answer, and then we're going to go into an open Q&A where you can submit your questions, ask, and then they'll answer. Okay, so for the first part, let's have all of you guys introduce yourselves. So tell me your name, school, state, and then one fun fact about yourself, or like what's your favorite algorithm?
All right, I guess I can start. My name's Agastya. I'm a junior from the Bay Area. I go to Gunn High School, and my favorite algorithm is the fast Fourier transform.
My name is Austin Geng. I'm from Ben Franklin High School, Louisiana, and my favorite algorithm, I just don't have one.
My name is Rohin. I'm a junior from Monte Vista High School in California, in the Bay Area, and my favorite algorithm is DFS.
That's cool. Okay, so obviously you're all here for coding. You've coded a lot. You've made the IOI team as some of the top 4 in the United States. So before we get into any questions, I think we have a LeetCode contest. It's the LeetCode Weekly Contest 372. Okay, we'll get started now. So this is Rohin's screen. He's opening questions. Notice that they load in all of the tabs so that they can save time in reading the questions, kind of clicking through. So we start with question 1. This is a 4-question really quick contest. He's going to start coding. Okay, it seems like he already has a pretty good idea of what he wants to do. In the meantime, if we look at Agastya's screen, he's looking at the question, opening up the IDE. Oh, it looks like he also already has a solution. Switching over to Austin's screen, he's looking. LeetCode is at a difficulty that's a bit easier than, say, USACO. So for these questions, they'll probably spend a lot less time thinking, especially considering their level. Okay, this is Rohin's screen. He's testing. Looks like he's making a few adjustments to the code. Okay, and he's, ooh. Okay, meanwhile, in Agastya, looks like this contest is a little bit harder than expected. They're all typing up solutions. All right. Would it be possible for you guys to make the text a little bit bigger on your submissions? Oh, looks like Rohin's moving on to question 2. This is Agastya's solution, and he's pasting it in. And he submitted correctly. Okay, let's see where Austin is. He's writing up the solution to question 1. Okay, meanwhile, we're moving on to a different question for Rohin. So in a specific contest like Leetcode, where it takes around 10 minutes to win, every line and every character counts, and you can see that the code is still maintained neatly while he's trying to write the solution. Okay, let's see Agastya's. Looks like he's submitting 2 separate black and white balls. And he got it right. Okay, moving on to question 3. Looks like there's a bit of an error here, but should be okay. Looks like make 3 strings equal is a bit hard this contest, which is interesting because I believe it's the first question. Looks like Rohin and Austin are struggling a little bit with this question, but let's see. Meanwhile, Agastya is reading XOR product. I think that's 3. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. Yeah, there is a screen that's supposed to be shared right now. Oops. Yeah. Okay, let's see where Agastya is. He's working on question 3. He has a solution. Looks like Rohin solved another question. He's on the final question, I believe. Taking from a template, which is not allowed in USACO, but is allowed in LeetCode. Okay, let me see if I can get this Discord invite. Okay, if you guys want to follow along separately, I'll put the link to this server/voice chat in the chat. You should be able to see the individual screen shares. Okay, looks like Austin, who uses DuckDuckGo for some reason, is moving on. Okay, I'm not gonna screen. It looks like Agastya is submitting question 3. Well, this question looks a lot harder than expected, I think. But it's really interesting how, for a higher level competitor, the difficulty of the questions doesn't make it take a lot longer, if that makes sense. Since they've seen algorithms like this before, notice how when Rohin saw the question initially, he knew which algorithm to go to and which structure to look at, which he's implementing now. Okay, I think Rohin is done, question mark? Yeah, okay, congrats. Let's see where everyone else is. Austin's on question 3. August is on question 4. That looks like a bit longer of a solution than I expected. Let's see where Austin is. Okay, Rohin, how do you think that contest went for you?
Overall, it was okay. I think it was like I think it started a little slow because I misread question 1 a couple of times. But I think overall it went like decently. I think the difficulty of this contest was like slightly harder maybe than an average LeetCode contest, but I think it's pretty similar in general.
Okay, interesting. Okay, let's see. Agastya is coding up the solution to question 4. And Austin's on question 3. So question in chat, IOI questions take way longer. Yes, in general. So LeetCode, the specific contest, or just in general, even though Rohin said it was harder than usual, it's usually pretty fast, as you can see. Notice that they didn't spend as much time thinking, they went immediately into coding, and a lot of like the errors and stuff were because they like misread or because like careless errors, I assume, right? But overall, this is just like a demonstration of like competitive programming in like a contest context. So Rohin, let's talk about this contest compared to, for example, IOI. How was the IOI experience?
Like in terms of the problems or
Yeah.
like in
Well,
general.
we can talk about the problems and then we can talk about like, I think we'll talk about IOI in general as a group. So like just this contest compared to like the IOI problems in particular, or I guess you can also compare it to like USACO monthlies or camp questions. What do you
Okay.
think?
So LeetCode problems are generally pretty standard, as in there are like very few new ideas you'll see in the problems. Like once we read the problems, like we generally immediately know what to do and have like a general sense of direction, even if we haven't figured out all the details. So when like LeetCode problems is usually just like knowing the idea beforehand, at least at this point. So there's like very little problem solving that goes into it. It's mostly just like apply some like well-known idea. But that's definitely not true for IOI problems. So aside from the difficulty, which is there's obviously a huge difference, where IOI problems, I can't solve one in 5 hours, but these takes like a couple minutes. So the difference is like one, just in the problem style and like what you're supposed like, and the fact that you have to like IOI problems are generally very novel, and the difficulty in the problem is like thinking of a solution rather than the code. So we spend like most of the time like on paper trying to think of something. And then as well, like there's just a general difference in difficulty in the problems.
That makes sense. So a lot of, for example, the questions you solved just now were mostly just recalling information about which algorithm to use and like how to apply it.
Well, it's less so of like recalling information as in doing something exactly the same as before. But yeah, so having done like similar problems in the past, it's kind of intuition in that we can like almost like guess what the solution will be like. So like the solving process, rather than being like trying out a bunch of random ideas, seeing if like you make progress and trying to make observations, it's more as if like you can kind of tell that, for example, in the third problem, like it was a binary problem, and the structure of the problem made it like
It's still
seem
solving.
as though
Yeah.
you'd have to do things like bit by bit, for example. So it's just more straightforward in that way. So it's just like easier to know what to do. So even if we haven't seen this exact problem before, it's easy to like know in what direction to pursue. So it's like easier to figure out.
That makes sense.
About lead code questions being bronze and easy silver difficulty, this is true, but I would say even compared to USACO, lead code is a lot more standard. So in USACO, if you look at bronze and silver problems nowadays, you'll see that like knowing algorithms is not enough. And you have to be able to like think on like by yourself and like make observations. And like that's the difficulty in USACO problems. And yes, DP is not bronze or silver, but the DP problems you see in lead code, this isn't always true. Sometimes they have like a pretty hard problem. But in general, lead code questions like with DP, they're not hard. They're just like the difficulty is like understanding DP. But if you understand and know DP, there's not much to like solve. It's just like applying some like standard idea. So so even if like the difficulty ends up being that, like even though the topic is like a gold topic, the difficulty might be like bronze level like thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and over here, I'm seeing Agastya adding asserts to his code. In general, for like the debugging process, do you have any specific strategies, thoughts? How much time does it take for you on like an average question? And what is usually like the error?
So in debugging, so there are like a couple of different types of errors. There's one where you're just getting a wrong answer, and I think this is the most common and the most frustrating. So you just get a wrong answer in the thing, and you have to decide whether like one, your code is wrong, like you made a small typo somewhere, or maybe your like entire algorithm is wrong and you made like a wrong assumption when you were thinking. So that's like the common one. Others are like time limit exceeded, where your code is too slow, and this might mean either like you have the wrong complexity, or and you need to rethink a solution and optimize it, or like you have a bad constant factor, so you have to just rewrite your code and hope it just magically gets faster. So each of these problems get like you like handle them differently. So what Agastya was doing with the certs makes it so that if you're getting wrong answer, this is a very helpful tool in USACO. You can kind of test if your assumptions that you made about the problem are correctly by including in your program asserts that throw a runtime error if the code reaches that. And this kind of gives you information, because if your code starts runtime erroring instead of wrong answering, it means that like the assert failed, and therefore like whatever information you assume to be true is not actually true. So like that is that's a common strategy. In general, I think the strongest strategy like that is most common, and I think I recommend to the most people to learn about debugging, is stress testing, where what that essentially does is you generate like thousands of random tests locally on your computer, and you write a brute force, and you run your code you run your brute force and your code on the generated tests, and you check if they match. And this lets you like generate small cases that your solution gets wrong answer on. And in almost all cases, if your solution passed all small cases, it'll like generalize the big cases. Like there are very rare exceptions, but it's a really good way to find like counter cases, so you can instead of just having to like stare at your code and hope that you find out what's wrong, like you actually have some like targeted thing that you can do.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I saw in the chat there's a question, even in IOI problems, aren't you relying on previous memories to help you solve the problem? Do you have an opinion on that?
So that's generally not true. I haven't ever solved an IOI problem and where I was like, yes, I've seen this before. So the way like problems generally work is that there might be small parts that you have seen before. Like if you reduce the problem significantly, like you might like know that like you might be able to solve like that specific instance with something you know before. Like an example of this is maybe you have a long problem, but the first step you do is you have to sort an array. Now sorting an array is an algorithm by itself. And that is something that's well known. But you apply sorting in an array to like a larger problem, and sorting and the actual sorting the array is probably not going to be the hard part of the problem. It's just like something else that you have to apply. So that's like kind of where like previous memory specifically comes into play. But more so than memory, what matters is like experience with problem solving. So as I was talking about with LeetCode, these LeetCode problems, like none of us have like practiced on LeetCode before. These just happen to be like similar in competitive programming problems. So we haven't seen these questions before. The reason we find them like easy is because we have intuition as what direction to pursue in the like the problem solving step. So instead of just trying things randomly, we kind of have an idea of what works and what might not work. So there's like less things we have to consider. So even though it looks like we just read the problem and immediately like divined a solution, the problem solving process is the same as all others. It's just a little more streamlined where when we try all of our ideas, it's just way more likely that the first thing we come up with works, if that makes sense. So like there's still a lot of problem solving, and in IOI problems particular, there are a lot of times where I feel like I end up just trying random ideas and hoping one sticks, and like it's hard to like the reason like people are better than others at IOI problems is just like the intuition that they develop and like their ability to like come up with observations and notice things about problems, which comes with practice. And it isn't exactly just memory, but it does require like practice and past experience.
So in competitive programming, would you say like the problem solving ability that you develop is more important from the practice that you do rather than like the like memorizing algorithms or anything else in particular?
Yeah, so especially for IOI, that is definitely true because IOI, if you look at the actual syllabus of what algorithms they use, like yes, it's expansive and yes, they have advanced things, but it's nowhere like it's not out of this world. And that's definitely not the difficulty when you come to IOI problems. It's very rare that the difficulty is like past knowledge. Like that's like the bottleneck where like someone doesn't know something before they go into the problem. It's usually like the problem solving aspect. So getting better at problem solving is definitely significantly harder than like coming up like than knowing these algorithms. And more so like when you get better at problem solving, you'll like learn these algorithms at the same time because you might even be able to like invent them yourself. So yes, like I would say like problem solving is definitely like the hardest part.
Okay, cool. I think Agastya, are you done too?
Yes, I'm also done.
Okay, how was the contest in your opinion?
I think it's fine. The first three problems, I think I was able to figure out the idea and not really do anything weird. At the beginning, you can see here, I was using C out because, you can't see, sorry. I was using C out because I didn't know what the LeetCode format was. But I think I figured out the first three problems pretty quickly. The fourth one, I made a few strange implementation mistakes. And so it took me a long time to debug it. But I think and I also initially tried to use an extremely advanced technique that was not necessary at all. So.
So Rohin and I were talking about some general Q&A questions, I think. Do you have any thoughts on like the format of USACO versus, for example, the contest you just did? Problem solving techniques, general, like, I guess, how would you say is your best advice? Let's just open it generally, like, to get better.
Well, I think my advice is not really going to align with what I did, because what I did for for most of my competitive programming training was just solving old USACO problems. I did not do problems from any other judges. I didn't even know code forces existed. And I did this for a really long time, and most of my improvement was due to this. But what I would actually recommend is using problems from a lot of sources. I think if you want to prepare for USACO specifically, doing old USACO problems is a great way to do that. But I think also doing things like code forces problems that are just a bit above your level is what you need to do.
I definitely think my USACO prepping strategy was pretty similar to yours, but I want to ask, like, do you have an estimation of like how many questions you solved approximately, or like how much time you spent per week, or just general, how much effort do you think you put, like first, let's say getting to Plat, getting to camp, and then making IOI team?
Yeah, sure. So getting to Plat for me, I think took 2 years-ish, a little more than 2 years maybe. And I think I solved far fewer problems than other people did to get to Plat. I solved maybe like 100 or so, maybe more. But I think that like my preparation was very difficult, was very different because I didn't really take contests as often as other people did. A lot of people would take Code Forces problems in which Code Forces contests in which they repeatedly solve easy problems every contest. And my strategy was generally just to take USACO virtuals at the like current division I was at. So I never really solved problems that were below my rating, so to speak. I also never really got implementation practice this way. But that was my strategy. So I guess I spent a lot longer per problem, and I guess it worked for me.
I think that makes sense. A lot of people seem to fall into like the doing easy questions rabbit hole, and I guess like your point is like doing harder questions might have helped you more like develop that problem solving skills that Rowan was talking about earlier. Um, so walk me through, for both of you, walk me through your journey of competitive programming. Like how old were you when you started? And like, I guess for some people who started later, like, do you think it'd be possible to make it to your level if you start in like, let's say, ninth or 10th grade? And like, when did you start? How, like, and then let's talk more about like from Plat to IOI. How was that journey?
You want to start?
Sure. So I started USACO in late 7th grade, I think. So maybe I think it was like in March of 7th grade. So pretty much right before the US Open. And then I like tried it out and I really just wanted to make gold during like on the US Open contest, which is obviously like an unrealistic goal because given that I had a week, but I was determined and I didn't do it. Like it's not like I was not able to do it, but I tried. And then in that week, like I got interested in like USACO and I like tried, and that was also the year where like COVID happened. So I had a lot of time and I spent most of it on competitive programming, I think. Like it was like my hobby that I did during those times. Like that's what I spent my free time doing because I actually started enjoying it. And then throughout the 8th grade, so I started 8th grade like in silver, and then over the summer I like improved a lot just purely because of how much time and effort I was spending on it. Because like I'm not exaggerating when I said like that was like my pastime, like that's like what I spent my free time doing, like over school and stuff. So then in 8th grade, I like in December, I ICP to gold, and then in Jan I ICP to plat, and then I took the Jan Feb and Open plat contest, and then I made camp in 8th grade. And then last year I also made camp, but I didn't qualify. I didn't make the IOI team, and then this year I like made the IOI team. So like the longest part, like the longest gap was camp to IOI for me. I think that took double the time as everything else. Which seems counterintuitive because camp and like IOI seem like it's like, oh, you're only going from like the top 25 to the top 4 versus like going from like the top like 10K to like the top 200 you had to go for plat. But it's actually like it ends up being like more, it gets difficult, it gets harder and harder, and the skill gap increases the higher you go, because like just people like at the tops put so much time and energy into it. So like everyone is trying like their hardest to like succeed. So I definitely found IOI, like making IOI like pretty difficult, and I'm very glad that I was fortunate enough to make it this year. But yeah, I think that was my journey. Did I answer the question? I kind of forgot what the question was.
No, I think that answered it pretty well.
Okay.
Agastya, do you want to add anything about your personal journey there? IOI?
Yeah, my personal journey I'd say was pretty different. I started in the summer before 6th grade, and I was just being taught mostly by my dad, who like knows a lot about this sort of programming. So Actually, I was taught like purely by my dad until I made plat. So in 6th grade, I started by ICP to silver in the December contest, and then I managed to narrowly make golds in the open contest of that year. And then I spent an entire, like all of my 7th grade not doing anything. Like I was still preparing. I was preparing pretty consistently. I'd say maybe like 5-6 hours a week. But I did not make plat that year. The next year I was able to make plat. This is 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I think very narrowly made camp because I had pretty mediocre performance for my first 3 contests, and then I barely leaderboarded on my 4th contest, so I made camp off of that. And then the next year, I did pretty good on the monthlies, and I made IOI. So I think that my like for me making plat took a long time, and then from camp I made camp in 1 year, but I barely made camp in 1 year. And then from there, I went straight to IOI. So I think my experience is pretty different. But I think it's also worth noting that like in the summer following camp, I like prepared very, very hard for USACO, like I'd say 4 hours a day or something. So I was preparing very hard that summer. And then the summer after, when I qualified for IOI, I was also preparing like 4 hours a week. So I think that's a little bit of a different story, but I think they both work.
And so for you, like Agastya, I know you personally do a lot of other activities in addition to like USACO. How do you think you maintain, for example, school, like math, research, a bunch of other like cool activities that you do while doing USACO?
Well, this wasn't a problem for a long time because like I said, I was just doing it very consistently since 6th grade. I think up until 9th grade, I was just doing 5 hours a week, which is pretty maintainable. And then since then, the way I've been practicing is I like during the school years, I've still not been practicing very much. I say max 5 hours a week during the school year. It's just during the summers, I've had lots of free time, and I've spent like all of that time doing coding. So I'm not entirely sure how that happened, but
That makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna ask some of the questions from chat. So earlier there was, how do IOI problems compare to USACO Plat and Gold? And then, do you have any strategies for practicing harder questions? For example, how long do you keep trying before looking at the solution? And like, I guess what advice would you give to someone, like, what's the best way to do a question if it's like slightly harder, you don't really know what to do?
well, I feel like in terms of how do IOI problems compare to plat and gold, I feel like it's almost a completely different dimension because when you're going from like bronze to plat, you're learning lots of problem solving skills, but you're also learning a lot of new algorithms and a lot of new data structures and a lot of like competitive programming tricks to help you. But then I feel like IOI problems, they still have some of those algorithms and they still have some of those tricks and data structures, but they're not as common and you don't really need the most advanced ones. And some IOI problems are to the point where essentially anyone can understand the solution, but it's all about coming up with it yourself. And so I think it's a completely different experience, although of course it's very related to the other USACO style problems.
Okay, makes sense. And then Rohin, do you want to answer the question of like how to prepare for like hard questions? Should you look at the solution when you're reading a question if you don't know how to do it?
Yeah, so the general advice that I think is best to follow is when you try a hard problem, don't look at the editorial until you feel like you're completely stuck. So at some point, like if a problem is hard enough, you just might not get any new ideas. Because like there's some observation that you need to notice that you just don't know how to approach, or maybe you even like you don't know the algorithm. So I think once you're at that point where you're like you physically like you feel like you're not making any progress at all, I think at that point it's okay to look at the editorial. Other people like suggest like waiting a little bit, like maybe like not opening it for a couple of weeks and then like going back to the problem to see if like sitting on the problem helped. But personally, like I definitely don't have the willpower to do this. And then even that, like sometimes like I get bored of thinking about problems and I look at the editorial, which is probably not a good strategy. But in general, I think like the best advice is to just like keep trying problems, like don't give up immediately. Which I think is a very common problem that people face is like the second, like if they just don't see the solution immediately, they just open it assuming that they won't be able to solve it, which is not true. But like if you get bored of thinking about a problem or like you just don't feel like thinking about it anymore because like it's just like not fun to think about, which happens sometimes. Just you might want to look at the editorial. Like I think just do whatever like feels best for you. Just in general, just try not to open it prematurely is what I'd say.
Okay, and then so for other Q&A questions, we'll have like an open Q&A section near the end. So feel free to wait until then, and then I'll send out like a Slido link and you can add your questions there. Okay, so both of you mentioned going to USACO Camp, and like obviously the contest there somehow select the IOI team. Let's talk about the USACO Camp experience and how it was. Any thoughts, General?
Yeah,
Rohin,
sure.
why don't you go? Oh yeah, never mind. Agastya, go first. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, USACO Camp is a very interesting experience because you're there and you're constantly just surrounded by competitive programming. And I think both years going to USACO Camp, I had this idea that, oh, it's okay. I'll take the contests and then I'm not going to think about competitive programming that much. I'll just think about other things, make friends. And you definitely make a lot of friends there. And I think it's really interesting how when you're in that hypercharged environment, you can just always be thinking about competitive programming and always just doing competitive programming, and you don't feel tired of it and you don't burn out. So that was a really cool experience for me. The 2 years or more, I guess, that you go to USACO Camp are different. So the first year you're a Guernsey, and that means that you're mostly listening to lectures and learning like competitive programming tricks. And you still take a few contests, but it's mostly lecture based. But then the second year you become a Holstein, and here you're competing for the IOI selection. So then you're taking 5-hour contests almost every day. And it's definitely a slightly more stressful experience, but I think they were both extremely fun.
And Rohin?
Yeah, so similar to what Agastya said, personally, I was expecting to go in there, like talk about competitive programming, because I think this was like the first time I was like surrounded by people who had like the same interest. And it was like nice to like have these discussions sometimes where you just talk about it and then like everyone knows what you're talking about and like everyone's interested in like having the conversation. That being said, I think like what I got the most out of camp would not be like the competitive programming parts, like, and like the reason I like miss camp or like I want to go back is not for the competitive programming. The experience in general is just really fun. Like you spend a week like by yourself, like surrounded by people with like similar interests and who end up having like similar thought processes and stuff in general when it comes to things. And like we got to do like a lot of fun activities, like going to an escape room, like going to Six Flags, stuff like that. And in general, the experience was really fun. And like I met a lot of people who I wouldn't have met otherwise, who I'm like much closer friends with now. And I think like that's like the part that I enjoyed the most out of both experiences. In IOI, it was even more different. We got to like explore a new country altogether and like see what the culture is like and meet a ton of people from different like cultures and backgrounds, and that was really cool. Like I really enjoyed meeting people from different countries and like talking to them and like talking about the differences in our countries and stuff like that. So that like I think that was the part I really enjoyed about IOI, just like the difference in like everything and like how like different it was to like an experience like that you would have had in the US. So Melody also has a vlog on the Project Star Coder YouTube channel that you can go watch, which describes our experiences at camp. So you should go watch that if you're curious exactly what happens at camp.
Thanks for the advertisement.
Welcome.
Okay, yeah. So I think the experience overall for competitive programming gives you guys a lot of like not only just programming and like problem solving skills, obviously, but also connections and friends, and that's really cool. So the next question I have is like, for someone who's trying to reach this level, what's the best way to prepare for the next contest after not getting very good scores? And then during contest specifically for monthlies, what's your problem solving strategy during the contest? And how would you approach like, I guess like kind of like the get rich quick scheme, like how would you try and get good fast?
So I'll start off with like contest strategy in particular. So the way my strategy works is at the beginning, I read all the problems, which you should always do. if you're doing like USACO or like IOI, where the problems aren't sorted by difficulty, because like they are like randomly ordered. Like I think they're alphabetically ordered. So it's important to read all the problems because the easiest one is often not the first problem. And then after that, I try to get a sense for all of the problems. I get a very basic intuition, try to like model it mathematically, or just make it like easy for me to think about and just like internalize the problem in general. And then after that, I usually just pick the one I feel like solving. So sometimes you can generally get a gauge for how hard the problem is. So like, and if you think that one problem is significantly easier, like that's the one I go for. And sometimes this is like completely off. For example, in IOI day 2, I thought the first problem would be really easy. And apparently so did like a lot of people in the contest. Like this was like a common theme, but it turned out to be like the hardest problem of like both days. So so like sometimes this like gauge is off. So I ended up wasting a lot of time on that problem when I should have spent it on a different one. But overall, it generally works well to just solve the one you feel like solving, because like that's the one you're going to be the most interested in anyway. And then switch off the problem after you think like you're not making any progress, or you want to think about something else, or like you solve the problem, or if like there isn't much time left in the contest, you want to go for subtasks because your goal eventually is to promote to the next division. And in almost all cases, the way you promote is by solving like 2 problems and getting subtasks, or solving like 1 problem and getting most of the subtasks on both of the other ones. So even if you can't solve the full problem, like definitely go for subtasks. And even before you go for subtasks, like read the subtasks, because sometimes the subtasks are good hints for the full problem, because they kind of like tell you what direction to think. Like I know of at least like one concrete example for a USACO problem where I think reading the subtask is what led me to the solution. And if I hadn't read the subtask, I might not have realized the solution, because they're kind of like, it's almost like an easier version of the problem. So yeah, that's like my general content strategy advice.
Yeah. Also, what was the second part of the question?
Just in general, wait, like the question of how do you like contest strategy in contest strategy? Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, I think the point about subtasks is really important. And just to add to that, just to give people a sense of like how long I think subtasks should take. I think I started programming, like competitive programming in 6th grade, and I don't think it was until like 6 months ago that I started giving enough time to subtasks. Like you can give as much more time to subtasks than you think you can. I think a reasonable estimate, if you're a slow typer like me, is maybe 45 minutes or an hour of the contest for just implementing subtasks. If you're a faster typer, maybe you can do it in 30 minutes. But I think you do need to be spending a lot of your contest on subtasks. And I like to start actually, depending on the contest, like for IOI contests, maybe even 2 hours before the end of the contest to start doing subtasks, but that's a bit extreme. So I just think that the most important things are to like read all the problems and spend at least half an hour on each problem, and just to make sure you don't lose any easy points, because generally going for subtasks is going to give you more points than trying to go for a full solution in the last 30 minutes.
Okay. And then this next question I saw in chat, how many of you guys do math contests and how has it helped you? So I think we actually have a good juxtaposition here between like actively trying to do math contests and like also like not. So Agastya, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. So definitely did math competitions first. However, I think quite quickly I decided to go for competitive programming instead. I think that by maybe 7th or 8th grade, I was pretty sure I didn't really want to do math competitions seriously. But I think what ended up happening is not so much that I don't think math competitions ended up helping my competitive programming that much. I think that a basic like mathematical intuition and at like for harder problems, being able to write down problems formally and eventually like manipulate polynomials to solve problems gets really important. But I think mostly math competitions were not as important to competitive programming for me. However, I will say that I think competitive programming ended up helping my math competition scene a lot. So.
And then for Rohin?
Yeah, so I did math in like 5th grade, and then I quit immediately. because I'm very bad at computation. Like I was and I still am. So and I like never really like pursued math competitions as a whole. And because of like the computation aspect, and then in like eighth grade, I started competitive programming and I never really tried on math at all. Like I've never put any effort into practicing for math. And but I do think I have improved at like math competitions like since then, purely from competitive programming. So usually when you look at people's journeys, like they do math first and then like their like math experience helps them with competitive programming. Mine was the opposite. I think my competitive programming experience helped me with math because like a lot of the problem solving aspects are very similar. And then so the issue with this is it didn't improve like my computation at all. So like my AMC scores would stay like relatively constant, while like things like well like my AME scores might go up because like the difficulty in like the two contests like are different. But like yeah, so I think pursuing competitive math is like a good thing if you enjoy competitive math. Like it'll definitely help you with USACO. But that being said, like I think practicing competitive programming is better for competitive programming than practicing math is for competitive programming, which sounds like obvious, but a lot of people like see like math and they're like, oh, all of these math kids are like getting good at competitive programming. I should, instead of doing stuff for USACO, like do stuff for math. And like that like all fine and good. But if your goal is to get better at competitive programming, my advice would be to practice competitive programming. If like you don't actually need that complicated, you don't need that good of a math background, and you don't need to know that much math to get good at like competitive programming. So like yeah, like math is useful, math is helpful, but if your like goals are like purely like competitive programming related, like I do think that like practicing for that is like more helpful.
Okay, that makes sense. So we'll be opening up the chat to general questions now. I think I saw one earlier, which is I'm trying to do around 1400 to 1600 levels code forces questions, but I don't know any way to organize them or get a distribution of skills from solving them. Do you have any suggestions?
So my strategy with picking problems to solve has always been like do what you feel like doing. And this is kind of what I advocate for in general, because like sometimes I just don't feel like solving something really hard because like I'm just a little tired and I just kind of want like the dopamine shot from getting like AC. So I solve like some like easier problems and like get satisfaction from that. And other times like I feel like I really want to try something and like I want to try something hard and try like one problem the entire day. And I do that too. And I think if you don't force yourself to do things that you don't feel like doing, you'll enjoy practicing more and you'll gain more from it than if you think you're like doing like one optimal path. But to answer your question in particular, so like when I do want to do things like at a specific rating, so there's like these bots in like Discord servers that give you random problems from a rating. Another way to do this is if you go to the problem set tab in Code Forces, you can filter by rating and then like open a random page and open a random problem. And I think solving random problems is like a really easy way to ensure that you get like variance in like the topics you solve. And it like kind of simulates a real contest experience where you get yeah, where you get like a random problem. And um so yeah, so like that's generally what I do if you like have that rating range that you want to do. Like just solve random problems and that's usually good enough. Like another consequence of this is if you solve random problems, you generally get the topics that appear more often just because of how like distributions work. So yeah, so like in general, solving random problems is a good way to get like to solve problems that are representative of like what you might actually get in contests.
Okay, and then for both of you, this question, do you have other competitive programming contests that you do that are similar to USACO? And which do you believe are the closest? And I guess kind of like a side note is how has like your individual skills and abilities helped you with like, for example, team dynamics, for example, say the IOI team doing Calico or like other competitions as a team? Yeah.
I feel like in terms of which competitions I have like done, I've never like I think ever really prepared or studied for or really cared about any competition that wasn't either USACO or IOI. But I have ended up taking a lot of other contests just for fun. I have taken, I think now 5 Code Forces contests, maybe 6. And I've taken Calico many times. We went to HPI in person. I've taken like some Stanford Proco contests. So I think just competitive programming is fun for me, and I've enjoyed doing a lot of competitive programming. And I also found that I've gotten good enough at USACO that like most competitions are not really significantly different. I think they're all somewhat similar, and so I don't feel like I feel like for most competitions you don't really need to prepare for them specifically. Of course, if you want to go for a higher code forces rating specifically, that'll be something different than just trying to do well in USACO.
Yeah, so I have a similar answer to Agastya, except for the fact that I'm emotionally invested in my code forces rating. So like I care about that too. But aside from that, like yeah, it's mainly USACO and IOI and code forces, and the rest of them are just like things that you do for fun and to get like I don't know like $60 if you win the contest. So like oh it's Calico, Calico. It's like yeah, which is a contest that happened recently, a team contest. So yeah, that's like generally the contests like that I do. Like it's there are other like if you're talking about it from like a practice perspective, like where to get other like problems from to practice, there's like other Olympiads that you can like borrow from. So these problems are generally hard, like harder than USCO plat problems sometimes. So like be wary, but there are other Olympiads like the Japanese Olympiad is like a good one. And yeah, so that's like another place you can practice from if that's what you're asking.
And as like a personal advertisement, if you guys are interested in like finding out new, for example, high school hosted competitive programming contests, CPI has a link of a bunch, and we send out emails and notifications for a bunch of high school programming competitions as they happen. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link somewhere. Okay. So the next question I see is, should you do sets of USACO problems at once at a time or do individual problems and time them?
Yeah, so I already know we're gonna have very different answers about this because I know that for most of my competition prep has been just taking virtuals. I have spent way more time doing that than well, not anymore probably, but for a long time I used to almost exclusively take virtuals and not solve that many problems outside of contests. Maybe I would upsolve problems I missed. And this is just because I enjoyed being under the time pressure and also because it like time bounded my USACO for that day. So I was like, okay, I'll take this like 4 hour contest and then I know exactly how long it's going to take.
So I do think that taking virtuals is a good idea, but personally, I found it hard to force myself to allocate like 4 contiguous hours, like in a day to just doing a virtual contest. So by the way, to explain what a virtual contest is, that's like simulating a contest by like timing yourself and like forcing yourself to like just simulating a real contest environment. So it's like one of the options that you said, and the other is just solving random problems. So I end up taking very few virtuals. Like even before IOI, I did not take many IOI virtuals just because like forcing myself to spend 5 hours, like 5 contiguous hours, like in a day was hard. Not because of like the focus, although that is also an issue for me sometimes, but just like it's just annoying to deal with scheduling, like when I'll take the contest. It's just inconvenient in general. But it is important to developing contest strategy. But like I think in terms of like problem solving, I think it really doesn't matter whether you do it in a virtual or outside. I think the main benefit of virtual contests is like one, like the problem solving, forcing yourself to go is the contest strategy, forcing yourself to go for subtasks, like planning your like determining what problems are easy or not, developing that strategy. And that's definitely very important to do at the beginning. But as you get more experience, like that becomes like less of an issue because you kind of understand like contest strategy in general. And at that point, the other benefit of virtuals is like what Agastya said, where it like limits your time for the day. And it's like kind of a fixed block of time that you know, like that, like you know exactly what how much time it's gonna take. So if that's something that you're like interested in, like you can take virtuals. But personally, I just haven't because I found it hard to like commit that much time, like force myself to commit that much time. So yeah, but like in general, I do think virtuals are really helpful. I just have not done that.
That makes sense. Okay, and then this question is, do you think USACO has helped you with like other like areas of programming specifically do you think it would help you as a software developer? And I guess I'll open this question a little bit more and say, like, have you personally like done any other programming like areas, and how has USACO helped with that?
I guess oh wait, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
So I've participated in hackathons and stuff. Like I've done all of like the standard CS kid type things. Like I've tried out ML and stuff as well. And in general, so I think the best thing you get from USCO in terms of like coding ability, so aside from the problem solving and like being able to like understand stuff quickly, which I do think is like one skill that you get, like it's easier for me to understand like new concepts when they relate to code just because of how much time I spent looking at it, like in looking at code. But aside from that, USCO does teach you about like code organization. Even though your code ends up being like it looks messy to an outside observer often, and if you see yourself like if you look at like contest solutions, like they'll end up being like a gross mess. But in general, you still have to like be able to understand your own code. And like during the contest, like the code does like it ends up making perfect sense to whoever wrote it. After the contest or like to outside observers, it might not look that way, but like it does teach you, and I think like this has helped me just like deal with code in general. Yeah, and yeah.
Okay. Austin, did you finish?
Yes, I did. I finally finished.
Okay, good job. How was the contest in your opinion?
Firstly, my biggest mistake in this contest was not understanding my contest environment. So if you noticed during the beginning of the competition, I was unable to submit at all because I did not verify my email address for my account. So normally prior to a contest, whenever I do a new contest, like for example, when I did Calico a lot with Rohin and Agastya last weekend, like I try to make sure I've read through all the rules and I know what the contest environment was. For example, in particular with Calico, I've done it before, so I knew what it was. But this was actually my first like LeetCode anything, and as a result, I did not know that LeetCode has to be submitted on the web browser, and I also did not know the account thing. So I would say that's one thing I've probably prioritized a bit too much, but not this time. It's that you want to make sure you understand your contest environment. Like for example, for USACO, for USACO, for example, partials in USACO, they're awarded on a per test case base. So like if you get like a scattering of test cases right because you had a good heuristic, then that does improve your score, even though on many other contests like IOI, because you missed just a single test case, you get the whole partial wrong. But like that's not the case with USACO. So that's, I guess, an example of knowing your contest, or of where knowing your contest is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so I guess I'll like kind of like back read, but like back ask a couple questions. So for your personal USACO journey from like bronze to IOI now, let's talk about, for example, like how much time you spent, what grade were you in, any tips, tricks, and like just general, like what was your journey like, and how do you feel, or like, I guess one thing I could ask is what would you do different if you could?
So prior to competitive programming, I had started competitive math in the middle school. And so that meant I did the AMC 8, the AMC 10, the AMC, and not the AMC 12 at that point. And then in my freshman year, I'm a senior, so that was 3 years ago. My friends introduced me to USACO, and that's how I got started. I just originally I went to USACO Guide, which is that great resource provided by the CPI, and I kind of just studied the entire bronze section. I did all the practice problems. And so when I took my first USACO contest, I actually did very well. I was able to ICP bronze and then reach the cutoff on silver. So I did actually make gold in my first contest. And then following that next contest, I tried to study for gold. I don't remember clearly exactly how much I studied, but regardless, I didn't make the cutoff I didn't make the cutoff because gold is much harder than, I mean, like gold is yeah, where problem solving and algorithm expertise really matters. I think nowadays it also matters a ton in silver. And so after that, actually, sorry, I have a hard time remembering what I did a few years ago, but in the next contest, which would be February, I did qualify and I made platinum. So I was able to make platinum in 1 year, but I would still say that's due to some luck.
That's cool. And then from platinum to, I guess, like doing plat contests and camp, and then from camp to IOI, do you think that that gap was significantly harder than, for example, like your journey in making plat?
Yeah, so I think that was definitely where like I really had to take it seriously because like firstly with the previous problems, I've always like in general, I've always liked to try to approach the whole task instead of subtasks as a whole. But like at platinum level, that's generally no longer feasible. And in fact, like rarely do it like the relative fraction of top problems in contests that like I managed to solve is very small. So at Platt, uh, like I started having to think about the problems in terms of like, so at Platt, I started had to have to look at the different partials, as Rohin mentioned. Like they tend to give you insights, but some partials are easier than others, but also worth much less than others. Other partials can be very difficult, and in some problems, the partials are arranged in a way where like if you solve two partials are kind of like they intersect to form the main problem. And so at that point when and then at that point in terms of studying like that I because I had jumped to platinum in only 1 year, that meant I actually was a bit lacking on practice in terms of gold problems. So at first I went through gold problems mainly just so that I could get into the rhythm of programming in general. And plat problems still like they take a lot of time to solve. So I actually haven't solved very many of them.
It seems like your USACO journey was pretty fast, and that's really impressive. Okay, so for the next bit, I'm going to address quite a few questions in chat about, I guess, improving in code forces. Specifically, like I saw a question about going from I'm high specialist, low expert, doing random 2000s. What's your best strategy for reaching CMRM? And some other general questions about, I guess, improving. Does anyone want to take this? And then I guess I'll like kind of add to this question of like, do you think, or like, how do you think your experience in like contests and stuff has helped you like improve your skills in other things? For example, problem solving. Like, what has USACO given you? So I guess you can answer like one part, both, either.
So to start off with the code forces question, I would say that like going from like specialist to candidate master isn't any different than any of the other like rating things. In general, like there's still like if you're a specialist, there's still probably a lot that you need to learn in terms of like actual algorithms. But more than that, like that's probably not like the issue. There's like a common joke in the competitive programming community that and the average specialist knows more algorithms than the average grandmaster because one common pitfall of like people who started generally like they focus on like learning algorithms rather than like problem solving. So I think your strategy of solving 2000s is like a decent strategy. But I would say that in general, like pick a rating range that you can solve sometimes, but not always. So like you should have to read the editorial sometimes because you can't solve the problem. Because if you can always solve the problem, it probably means that like it's it's not like hard enough for you. Like if you can always solve it, it's better if you can sometimes solve problems with that rating range and sometimes not. So you shouldn't always be reading the editorial because that means the problems are too hard for you and like you aren't able to solve them yourself. But if it's like if it's like split evenly between being able to read the editorial or having to read the editorial and being able to solve it yourself, then it's probably like an appropriate difficulty for you. So if 2000s are that difficulty, like go for it, like practice 2000s. But like, yeah, that's just my general advice on picking problem difficulties.
Yeah, I think this other question that was asked is how does competitive programming help with other things like other competitions? And I think that it very much does, not necessarily because you're going to be using actual competitive programming techniques, but just because the problem solving aspect is very similar in all of them. I think like my journey is like kind of almost proof of this because in like freshman year, I did not really study math at all. Up through my sophomore year, I just kind of quit competitive math. I wasn't finding it as interesting anymore, but I did a lot of competitive programming. And then in 10th grade, I made the USACO and then I made MOP. I think just solely based off of doing a lot of competitive programming. So I think that competitive programming definitely helps in like other competitions. But again, it's not really because you're learning how to code, it's just because the problem solving aspect is shared between all of them.
Okay, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask them in chat. I guess in general, do you guys have any like thoughts on, okay, actually there is a question. What other resources are there for USACO? Should I mainly use Codeforces or are there other places? Yeah.
Yeah, I think very like is kind of a wacky way to do it, but a short summary of like a bunch of big like international competitions is this is a resource a lot of people use for like tracking which problems they solved, but it just includes a general list of all the competitions that are like large world competitions. So we have IOI, and then there's APIO, BOI, USACO, COI, all of the good stuff. And I think that this is, I think, a resource that's mostly if you're plat and looking to go beyond plat because these problems are pretty hard. For like USACO, like gold and below, I'd say you should just use Codeforces, or you should also use @coder or topcoder.
Yeah, so if you're asking about, so like for problem sets, yeah, like that I would agree with that. If you have like about like resources to learn stuff, USACO Guide is like a good resource. I think if you want to like learn topics, and they also have problems sorted by topic there. So if that's something like you want to like you realize you're weak at something and you want to practice a topic in particular, like that's a good like place to access like problems by topic. So yeah, like that's generally what I recommend because it has a bunch of like other like the other benefit of USACO Guide is not only do they have like tutorials that they wrote, they include links to other tutorials. So if you prefer video formats, like that's usually an option. So stuff like that. Yeah, like that's what I'd recommend if you're looking to like learn topics.
Also, adding on to learning topics, very often CPI will have very good guides, but sometimes there'll be like a topic that just isn't there because maybe it's really niche or maybe I don't know, maybe it's not there. And so I think another strategy you can use that I use a lot is to search topic name, Codeforces, and then usually a very high quality blog will come up as the first search result. So I think this is another resource you can use. It's maybe a little bit more sketchy, but I think it works for essentially everything I've ever tried it for.
Okay, Austin, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think so like a key aspect again, like with resources and learning, it's that a lot of like I found that Codeforces blogs, USACO Guide articles, and the linked PDFs to those books, like what was it, CPH, Competitive Programmers Handbook, and so on. Those are very useful for like learning a data structure or an algorithm in an academic context. And for example, it's what a Codeforces blog is what taught me how to do a segment tree in only n times 2 space through an interesting trick that you would not think of normally. But the way I like actually nail down and learn these algorithms is definitely more to do with implementing them and using them in practice, because that lets me, for example, if something goes wrong with my implementation, I can debug it. I have like a hands-on input to work with it, so I can better understand the algorithm. And of course, just by using it, I'm helping memorize it as well. So do more practice problems.
Okay. The next question is, how do you get the most out of each problem, you think, like in terms of practicing and learning? And then I guess I'll like add this on. So in your response, you can also include this, which is like, how did you stay motivated while practicing?
In terms of getting the most out of every problem, I think that's like not the best way to look at it, because I don't think there's like a single person who's run out of maybe except Rain. I think there's like not a single person that is like run out of competitive programming problems. There are just way too many of them. So I don't not to say you should waste problems, because for example, there are only like a few IOI problems, but there are only a few USACO problems. But if you're just talking about good problems in general, there are way too many of them. So I think that you don't need to worry that much about getting the most out of each problem if you're not having fun solving a problem, or if it's like if you're just stuck, you can look at the editorial. I think the main thing is just to like not make the most out of your time. So if you're reading a really hard problem and then you look at the editorial, you've kind of just wasted your time because you haven't learned much from that. So I think you just want to choose a problem that's the appropriate level, and if you can't solve it, you can't solve it. Look at the editorial, you've learned a lot.
I would say, like, in the context of specifically reading an editorial, I found that some editorials, especially for more difficult problems, and if they're written not too well, they can actually be their own challenge to read. So in that sense, you can get a bit out of them by trying to understand what the editorial is saying, which is kind of just a series of mini problems more at the conceptual level. But in addition to that, when reading editorials, like once you've chosen to like read the editorial and given up on like solving the problem without it, I would say it's definitely like really understand it. Don't just like read every sentence and convince yourself that it's probably correct. Like try to get a bigger picture of what the editorial is saying. Like, why is this editorial a natural solution? Why is it not contrived? Why does it make sense, sort of?
Okay, that makes
One
sense.
other thing I'd like to emphasize is the fact that like I think you should implement all the problems after you read them, like after you read the editorial. Because a lot of times you'll read the editorial, think you understand it, and then you try to actually implement it and you realize either you don't understand, like you don't fully understand it, or you're missing some details, or there's like something you didn't notice, like stuff like that. So yeah, just like try to implement the problems. Like make sure to do that after you read the editorial.
Okay, the next question I have is, how did you guys stay motivated on practice? I think this was a little bit answered earlier, but like, how much time did you spend and how much time would you recommend spending on USACO in a week?
Okay, wait. So to stay motivated with practice, my answer for me personally was just because I think I just enjoyed competitive programming. So it wasn't a problem to stay motivated because like I would just genuinely do this when I was bored or like wanted to do something. Like it's how I found it fun. So and I found that in general, if you look at camp, if you look at all the campers, like I'd say like almost all of them will like the same thing will be true for them, that like they started like improving and started doing better when they like genuinely started enjoying it. So I think like that's like a good way. Like it's like hard to force yourself to enjoy something, but if you stop forcing yourself to like practice and start trying to like find parts of it that you enjoy, like maybe like learning new things, like if that's like the fun part for you, like I don't know, it's just like just try to enjoy what you do rather than like specifically force yourself to do it. And like as for time management is something that I don't think I'm particularly qualified to like give advice on. But in general, like the way I always did it was like as I said, like I just did it when I felt like it. And for example, like now I've taken like a small break after IOI just because I was a little burnt out and like I have a lot of things going on right now. But if you want to improve, like I think it is important to like dedicate like specific practice time to USACO. And the amount of time you're gonna have to put is like very personalized, and it's hard to like give specific numbers as in like how many hours you need to practice to like make a certain level. So like I do think that just doing it as much as you feel like is probably like the best answer I can give.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to that.
I also don't have much to add.
Okay, that's fair. Let me see what other questions I have. Okay, from Ritman Nara, a fellow USACO camper. Favorite competitive programming problem?
I think I have 3 problems that are all very, very close. The first is APIO circles. Then there is IOI werewolf, and then there's I forgot the name. 1 second, sorry.
Yeah. I guess
Uh,
also include in this answer, like, why is it your favorite problem?
Oh yeah, I mean all of these problems are like very light on data structures. They don't really involve complicated algorithms. And I think that the reason I like them is because there's some technique that is just really specific and like really specific to that problem, and I think is extremely simple. So I think that the problems are really interesting. Is the reason that the problems are interesting is because they're really hard, but they're also really simple once you know the solution. And so finding that out is really exciting. I did not solve all of these problems, but yeah, so it's IOI werewolf, APIO circles, and then I will post the last IOI problem in the chat as soon as I remember its name.
Okay, I guess Rohin or Austin, do you have your favorite questions?
So I have a couple as well. So one of them is it was actually a skill plat problem from a couple of years ago. Like, and I think I was biased because I like actually solved this problem and I was really proud of myself. But I thought the solution, like the reason I liked it was one, that I solved it, and two, that the solution was really like cool and unexpected. It's called like 262144 revisited. Like the end, like the final solution was like not something I expected at all. Like I did not like imagine like the way to get like it was just really weird for me because I expected the solution to be completely different. And then like I like realized like what the path to the solution was. And I thought like the rest of the stuff's really interesting. Um, and then 2 other problems I liked. So one was like called like Keishi in search of like MSHC or something. I think it was like one of the Iranian rounds, I think like 800 or 808 or something like that. But it wasn't like too difficult, like relative to like the rest of the problems that were mentioned already. But I really liked the observation because it like used like a standard topic in a really non-standard way. And I thought it was like really cool to like see that applied. And it like felt like almost magical once you solved it. And like there are a lot of people who like just did not imagine that like some like that you could solve a problem that seems so difficult with a solution that seems so simple. So that's what I really liked. And then the third one, it's a I like it because I wrote it. I think overall it's not like that like amazing, but like I thought the observation was really like I was really proud of it when I solved my own problem, so I like it a lot.
So for me, I would say any problem that's too old has just kind of disintegrated into mush in my memory. But besides that, because of recency and because I solved it and I liked it, there's IOI, this year's IOI robot contest, which is an interactive problem. Because like you can basically not apply any like pre-existing algorithms or data structures to that problem. You just have to work with the like circumstances you're given with the like kind of like a cellular automaton kind of thing. And basically it was just extremely novel is how I would put it. And the only other one I can think of that I particularly liked was also an interactive problem. I don't think in general I prefer interactive problems, but it is from COCI, correct? The Croatian Open Competition in Informatics, last year's cycle 2022-2023, the second contest, and it was titled let me just paste it in the chat. that which is about a piece of bread and an ant that walks on a piece of bread and needs to figure out how many holes are in it. Because the solution I found ended up being extremely natural and an interesting consequence of like the Euler characteristic or something. So yeah. And besides that, there's probably I definitely feel like I've encountered more interesting problems, but I just don't remember them very well.
That makes sense. Okay. And then I think the last question I see in chat, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in chat, but I think we'll be wrapping up soon, is how do you make sure you have a oh my God, how do you guys make sure you have solidified your understanding of a topic?
Well, the thing is, I'm not very good at this, so I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice on this. Because I think the reason I can say this is because the first time I solved a problem that uses the principle of inclusion-exclusion, which is a relatively basic competitive programming technique, was this Thursday. So I think that I am not very good at making sure that, like, if I don't know how to do something, I learn how to do it. But I think one thing that's really helped me is that I seem to like the topics that are most disliked by other people. As in, like, I really like geometry problems, I like math problems, I like the really weird problems. And so for this reason, I feel like I like haven't had an issue of avoiding topics. And so that's just been lucky for me, but I'm not very good at making sure that I actually know a wide variety of content. I just end up knowing a wide variety of content because I do a lot of problems.
Okay, I did actually get another question. What do you do when you get the test cases right, but the hidden cases wrong for a given question?
Yeah, so this is really common and happens to me like almost all the time. So, in general, like you try to figure out like my general strategy, depending on the difficulty of the problem, is to either like look through my code again, try to find small mistakes, or like maybe like quickly like double check all of my ideas and see if I made any like obviously wrong assumptions. And then finally, if like these don't work, like go to stress testing, which I described earlier, like try a bunch of random test cases locally and compare it against a brute force solution. And hopefully you can find a small test that fails. Usually all of these are enough to like find the mistake. So yeah, like I would recommend doing these. And I'm a very big proponent of stress testing, as like many people around me know. So yeah, like I recommend learning that.
Also, adding on to the point about stress testing, I first learned how to stress test like maybe a little bit less than a year ago, maybe even more recent. And when I learned, I was extremely shocked at how easy it was. I thought it was going to be way harder. So if you're thinking like, oh, this is going to be really hard, I mean, it's not going to be really, really easy, but it's going to be pretty easy, and it's going to be way faster than trying to find a test that doesn't work by hand.
I don't have much to add. I second that. I personally like have not stress tested much, but I would in the future I would definitely change that.
Makes sense. Okay. I'm seeing a couple of questions in chat, and I guess we'll like kind of wrap it up with one final question, which is like, do you have any advice for someone who's trying to like improve their problem solving skill abilities, and like general advice for USACO for anyone?
I mean, I guess the best advice I can give is like, do problems that you want to do. Like, if you don't feel like doing competitive programming, you don't have to. You don't have to force yourself to do it. But if you really want to, then yeah, do it. One thing I did a lot was I would like open a few problems on Codeforces, read them all before going to school, so that if I was really bored, I could think about them in class. I think just wanting to do competitive programming is the most important thing. And if you want to do competitive programming and you like do problems that you want to solve, I think you'll be fine.
Rohin or Austin, any final remarks?
I think also besides the motivation, which I definitely think is an important factor, it's like having an idea of when you can do some competitive programming Like, of course, you can think about a problem anytime, but being in front of the computer is like not something you can do 24/7. And and so I think getting like a schedule, or like thinking like maybe I'll spend this study hall just looking through some problems, doing some practice implementation is important. And of course, finding friends like to participate, not just in like team contests, but also just in practice in general, or just to talk to chat to. Like, oh, I found this new weird C++ standard algorithm that solves all my problems, kind of thing. It helps to keep things interesting, I think, which goes towards that motivation factor.
And Rohin, and while you're at it, there's also a question about, can you elaborate on your stress testing? Do you generate random test cases, or do you come with potential edge cases?
Yeah, so usually I just generate random test cases because like I'm like it's very easy to like miss an edge case, and sometimes it's just not an edge case, like it's an implementation bug. So generating random cases is like a lot more versatile. You can generate edge cases by yourself, which is something I do sometimes. And yeah, so I generate random test cases usually. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I am a strong proponent of the advice. If you don't know what to do, Google that thing code forces. That's like where I learned basically how to stress test. Is if you just search stress testing code forces, a bunch of blogs come up on code forces on how to stress test, like convenient ways to generate random test cases, like the bash scripts that are involved in automating the process. So I think that if you just read through that and maybe you can fake some programs that don't work and see if stress testing works for you, and maybe try it in contest, I think you'll pick it up pretty quickly.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for your time. I think there are a couple more questions in chat, so if you want to like text or answer them, but I think it's getting a little late. So thank you everyone for coming out and coming to this workshop. Thank you to the IOI team. Yeah. Okay. And good luck on the upcoming USACO contest.
All right, bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.